Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to look at Linux. We've got a whole bunch of real interview questions and answers.
Mm,
The kind that, well, they could make or break a Linux job candidate.
yeah. And we're gonna take all of the stress out of it and just have fun and learn a whole bunch about Linux. So whether you're, just curious or need a refresher, or maybe you're prepping for a job interview yourself, we've got you covered.
I have to admit, I'm a little intimidated by Linux. I mean, the command line, it feels like something out of, like a hacker movie or something.
It's not that scary. Once you get the hang of it, it's really not that bad.
Yeah.
You can think of it like you're learning a new language that gives you more control over your computer.
Okay.
And trust me, some of these commands are surprisingly useful,
Okay.
even if you're not a tech wizard. But before
Yeah.
we jump into the command line, let's make sure we're all on the same page.
Yeah, what exactly IS Linux?
Linux is a powerful operating system. Like, its more famous cousins, Windows and Mac OS. It's the software foundation that lets you interact with your computer's hardware. The magic of Linux is that it's open source, meaning anyone can contribute to its development.
Okay.
And because it's so adaptable, there are tons of different versions
Okay.
called distributions, each with its own flavor and focus.
Oh.
So you've got Kali for security enthusiasts, Red Hat for enterprise solutions, CentOS for stability, Ubuntu for user friendliness, and SUC for a little bit of everything.
So it's kind of like, choosing a car.
Yes.
They all have an engine, the operating system, but you pick the model that suits your needs best.
Precisely. Now, under the hood of all of these distributions, you have the heart of the system, the Linux kernel.
Okay.
It's the ultimate manager, coordinating how software interacts with your computer's hardware.
Got it.
But enough with the car analogies. Let's
Ah.
talk about what makes Linux really unique, the command line interface.
Okay, here's where I start to get a little bit nervous.
Don't worry. Once you get the hang of it, the command line can be so efficient and fast. Imagine being able to create folders, move files, search for text, and even automate tasks just by typing a few words. It's like having a direct line to your computer's brain.
Okay, so maybe not as scary as I thought. What kind of commands are we talking about? I mean, I'm used to clicking icons and buttons, not typing, cryptic code.
Don't worry, it's not cryptic code. And you might be surprised to learn that some of these commands are really quite simple and super useful even in everyday life. So let's start with one that everyone should know, password.
Password, does that have something to do with passwords?
You got it. The password command lets you change your password. And this is just cybersecurity 101. You should be regularly updating your passwords and making them strong.
Strong passwords. That means not using password 123.
Right. Definitely not. A strong password is going to be a mix of uppercase and lowercase letters, numbers, and symbols. And please don't use the same password for multiple accounts. That's like using the same key for your house and your car and your office. One breach and everything's compromised.
Good advice. What other command line magic can you show me?
So let's say you're working on a shared computer and you need to log off securely. That's where the exit command comes in. It makes sure that no one can access your session after you leave.
So exit is it's like closing the door behind you, essential for digital privacy.
Exactly. Now imagine you're working on a big project and you need to organize your files. On Linux, you can create folders called directories using the amelia command. Think of it as like building a filing system for your digital world.
So instead of dragging and dropping folders, I would type a command.
That's right. And once you get used to it, it's so much faster, especially when you need to create multiple folders at once.
Okay, I'm starting to see the appeal. What other tricks do you have up your sleeve?
Let's talk about a command that often confuses beginners. It's called touch. Think of it like a digital timestamp. You can use touch to create a brand new empty file. But the real magic of touch is its ability to update the last modified timestamp of an existing file.
So I can make a file look like it was recently edited, even if I haven't actually changed anything.
You got it. Now, that might seem pointless at first, but it can be really useful for things like automating tasks. Imagine you have a script that processes files based on their last modified timestamp. Well, by touching a file, you can trigger the script to reprocess it without actually changing the content.
Oh, that's clever. It's like leaving a note for the script like, hey, take another look at this.
Exactly. Now, let's say you accidentally launch a command and it just keeps running and running. You need a way to stop it before it takes over your entire system.
Yeah.
That's where curl+c comes in. It's the emergency brake for runaway commands.
Oh, okay. So when in doubt, curl+c. Got it. What about working with text files? Are there commands for that too?
Absolutely. Whether you're a writer, a programmer, or just someone who deals with a lot of text, Linux has got you covered. Let's start with WC, which lets you count the words and lines in a file.
That could be useful for like checking the word count of an essay
Mm-hmm.
or even seeing how many lines of code are in a program.
Exactly. And if you need to move or rename files, the MV command is your go-to. It's like a digital moving van and a name change service all rolled into one.
So it's not just for moving files around, but I can also use it to rename them.
That's right. Now let's talk about something super crucial: file permissions.
Okay.
This is where the chmod command comes in. It lets you control who can read, write, or execute a file. Think of it like setting digital bouncers at the door, making sure only authorized users have access.
So chmod is like setting the rules for how a file can be used
Mm.
and who can use it.
Precisely. Now here's where things get really interesting. The pipe symbol lets you chain commands together, taking the output of one and feeding it as input to the next.
So it's like building a custom workflow, like a digital assembly line.
Exactly. The pipe is one of the most powerful tools in the Linux command line. It lets you combine simple commands to accomplish some really complex tasks. Speaking of powerful tools, let's talk about LL. Think of it as taking inventory. It lists all the files in a directory, but with some extra details, like permissions, sizes, and modification dates.
So it's like a supercharged file explorer.
Yeah.
And if I ever get lost in the command line jungle, is there a way to to get help?
Don't worry, you'll never be truly lost. You have the man command. It's your built-in guide.
Okay.
You just type man followed by the command that you need help with, and it'll give you all the detail. It's like having a comprehensive manual right at your fingertips.
You don't need to memorize everything then.
Yeah.
What about those times when you need to, clean up your digital clutter? Are there commands for deleting files and folders?
Absolutely. LM is the command for deleting files, and AMA is for deleting directories. But be careful, these commands are permanent. So make sure you really want to delete something before you hit enter.
Yeah, it's like hitting the delete key, but with no recycle bin to rescue you. So use with caution.
Exactly. Now let's talk about a couple of commands that are especially useful for working with log files. We've got tail. It lets you peek at the end of a file, which is perfect for seeing the most recent entries in a log. And tail nash 10, that will show you the last 10 lines, giving you a quick snapshot of, what's been happening.
Oh, so it's like a time machine for your files.
Yeah.
It lets you see what happened in the past.
Yeah.
What about like actually reading the contents of a file? I imagine there's commands for that too.
You've got several options depending on what you need. Cat will display the entire contents of a file, which is great for small files. But if you're dealing with a large file, you'll want to use more or less, which let you scroll through the file page by page. And for the true command line enthusiast, there's V. It's the classic text editor.
Whoa, hold on. A text editor in the command line? That sounds a little intense.
Yeah, Vi has a little bit of a learning curve, but once you master it, it can be so powerful. It's the choice of many programmers and system administrators. But let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about commands, but I'm still a little fuzzy on how they all fit into the bigger picture of the Linux file system.
The file system. It's like a vast, organized city with streets and buildings and hidden alleyways. And just like in a city, you need to know how to navigate to find what you're looking for. And that's where paths come in. So you have absolute paths, which are like giving someone directions from a fixed starting point. The root directory, which is denoted by...
So an absolute path would be like saying, start at City Hall, go 3 blocks north, and then 2 blocks east.
Exactly. And then you have relative paths, which are like saying, go 2 blocks north from where you are now. They're based on your current location within the file system. To help manage this digital city, we have the chown and the chmod commands.
What do those do? Are they like digital traffic cops?
Not quite, but they do help maintain order. Chown lets you change the owner of a file or directory, while chmod modifies the group that's associated with it. This is all about controlling access, ensuring that the right users have the right permissions.
So it's like assigning property rights and access privileges to different users and groups.
Makes sense. Within this intricate file system, you have different types of file systems themselves, each with its own way of organizing data. It's like choosing the right type of filing cabinet for your needs.
Okay.
Some popular options include ext4, which is commonly used by Linux, NTFS, which is often found on Windows systems, and FAT, which is more universal but has limitations.
So many choices. It's like picking the right tool for the job, but for your entire hard drive.
Exactly. Now, let's talk about a couple of special directories. The bin directory is so crucial because it houses all of the essential programs needed for the system to boot up properly. Think of it like the engine room of your computer.
So without those programs, the system wouldn't be able to start up.
Right. It's like trying to start a car without a battery or an engine.
Okay, that's important. What about the etc. directory? I know we've mentioned it a few times. What's so special about that one?
Etc. is like the control panel for your Linux system. It's where you'll find configuration files for all sorts of things, from networking to system services to user accounts. And remember that fun fact that we mentioned about the etc. mod file.
Oh yeah, the message of the day. You can use it to, display a custom message to users when they log in. What a cool way to personalize a system or give important announcements.
It is. It's one of those little touches that make Linux so flexible and customizable. Now, remember how we talked about DNS earlier? It's like the internet's phone book. It translates those easy-to-remember website names into numerical IP addresses that computers can understand.
Right. But there's more to DNS than just, like, looking up website addresses, right?
You're absolutely right. There are different types of DNS servers, each with a specific role to play. So you have the master or primary DNS server, which holds the authoritative records for a particular domain. Think of it like the main library for a city, holding all the official records.
Okay, so that's like the primary source of information for a domain. What about secondary DNS servers? What do they do?
Secondary or slave DNS servers, they act as backups. They're ready to step in if the primary server goes down.
Okay.
They keep copies of the DNS records and can take over if needed, ensuring there's no interruption in service.
So it's like having a backup generator for your house
Yeah,
in case the power goes out.
exactly. It's all about redundancy and ensuring that the internet keeps running smoothly. Now, those all-important DNS records, the information that maps domain names to IP addresses, are stored in special files called zone files.
Where are these zone files typically located?
You'll usually find them in the Varnamid zone files directory. It's like the library special collections section, where the most valuable and sensitive documents are kept. But DNS is just one piece of the networking puzzle. We've talked about IP addresses and how they're essential for devices to communicate on a network. But what happens if you have two computers with the same static IP address?
Uh-oh, that sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It is. You'll have an IP conflict, which can cause all sorts of communication problems. It's like two people trying to live at the same address, confusion and chaos.
So how do you fix that? Do you need to, call in a digital referee?
Luckily, it's not that complicated. You just need to make sure that each device on the network has a unique IP address, whether it's assigned statically or dynamically. And if you need to change an IP address to a static one, you can do that by editing network configuration files. The exact file location and process can vary depending on your Linux distribution, but some common ones include Exetranet network interfaces on Debian-based systems, Exetrasys confin network scriptzip FFG ETH0 on Red Hat-based systems, and Xebnet plan for Ubuntu.
Got it. So many different files and directories to keep track of. It's a good thing Linux has that handyman command for help.
It is. Now, remember that error message we talked about earlier, ping, unknown host?
Yeah.
It usually pops up when there's a problem with DNS resolution, meaning your system can't translate the host name that you entered into an IP address.
Right, like when you try to visit a website, but your computer can't figure out where it is on the internet.
Exactly. There are a few possible culprits. First, check your echoes file. This file contains manual mappings between host names and IP addresses. If the host name you're trying to ping isn't listed there, your system won't know how to find it.
So it's like having a personal address book for websites that you frequently visit.
That's a great analogy. If it's not in your local address book, then your system relies on DNS servers to do the translation. But if there's a problem with your DNS configuration, like an incorrect DNS server address, you'll also get that unknown host error.
So it's either a local mapping issue or a DNS server problem.
In most cases, yes. And speaking of DNS, remember that port number that we mentioned earlier, port 53?
Yeah.
It's like the designated channel for all DNS traffic to flow through.
Okay, so port 53 is like the special hotline for DNS requests.
Precisely. Now let's imagine a scenario. Your PC has a DNS server address configured, but not a default gateway.
Okay.
Can you access the internet?
That's a tricky one. I know a default gateway is like how you connect to the outside world, so I'm going to guess no.
You are absolutely right. A default gateway is like the exit door from your local network to the wider internet. Without it, you can communicate with devices on your local network, but you can't reach anything beyond that.
So it's like being stuck in your house, even though you have a phone book to look up addresses.
Precisely. You need both. The address, DNS, and a way to get there. the default gateway.
Makes sense. So we've talked about different types of DNS servers, but what about like different types of file systems? I know Linux uses a hierarchical file system, but what are some common options?
Good question. We've already touched on a few, like XD4, which is widely used by Linux systems and known for its reliability and performance.
Right. XT4 is like the standard filing cabinet for Linux.
That's a good way to put it. But there are other options, like NTFS, which is commonly used by Windows, and FAT, which is more universal and can be used by both Windows and Linux, but it has its limitations.
So it's like choosing the right type of like storage system based
Yeah.
on, your needs and the operating system that you're using.
Exactly. It's all about finding the best fit for your specific situation. Now, remember that powerful command we discussed earlier, the one that can create multiple directories with a single line?
Oh yeah, the one with the curly braces. Brace expansion, I think it's called.
Yeah,
I couldn't remember the exact syntax, but I remember it being like super efficient.
it is. Let's say you want to create a bunch of directories named A1, A2, A3, B1, B2, B3, and so on. You could type out each mkdir command individually, or you could use brace expansion and do it all at once with mkdir a.c 1.3.
9 directories created with one command. That's amazing. I'm starting to see the real power of the Linux command line. It's like having like a Swiss Army knife of tools
Yeah.
at your fingertips.
And we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore, but I think we've laid a solid foundation of, Linux essentials for our listener today.
We've covered a lot in this deep dive into Linux. I mean,
Yeah.
from basic commands to networking concepts, file systems, even a little bit of cybersecurity wisdom.
It's been quite a journey, and you've done a fantastic job keeping up with all the twists and turns.
I have to admit, I was pretty intimidated by Linux at first. All those commands and files and directories, it all just seemed like a secret code that only tech wizards could,
Huh.
decipher. But now I'm starting to see the logic, and the elegance behind it all. It's like learning a whole new language, one that gives you more control over your digital world.
That's a great way to put it. And just like with learning any new language, the key is to start small. Be patient with yourself and practice regularly.
So what are some, key takeaways for our listener today? What's the so what of all this information?
I think the biggest takeaway is that Linux, despite its reputation for being complex, it's actually quite accessible. The command line, it can be intimidating at first, but as we've seen, once you learn a few basic commands, it becomes such a powerful tool and so efficient.
Absolutely. And it's not just for, tech gurus or system administrators.
Right.
Anyone can benefit from understanding even just the basics of Linux, especially in today's, technology-driven world.
Right. With the rise of cloud computing, open source software, the Internet of Things, Linux is practically everywhere. It's in our smartphones, our cars, our homes, and of course countless servers powering the internet. Knowing how to navigate this world, even at a basic level, can be a huge advantage.
It's like having a secret decoder ring for the digital age.
I love that analogy. And another key takeaway is that the Linux community is vast and incredibly supportive. There are countless resources available online. You've got forums, tutorials, documentation, all dedicated to helping you learn and troubleshoot any problems you might encounter.
It's like having a global network of Linux experts,
Yeah.
just ready to lend a hand.
Precisely. So if you're feeling inspired, we encourage you to, take that first step. Try out some of the commands that we've discussed. Explore the file system and see what you can discover. You might just surprise yourself with what you can accomplish.
You know what? I'm surprised with how much I've learned today. I'm actually excited to keep exploring Linux. I might even set up a Linux virtual machine on my computer to practice everything we've talked about.
That's a fantastic idea. And remember, the beauty of Linux is that it's all about experimentation and learning by doing. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. That's how we all grow.
Well said. And with that, I think it's time to wrap up our Linux adventure for today.
I've really enjoyed our deep dive. It's been a pleasure exploring the world of Linux with you and our listener.
Me too. And for our listener, we leave you with this final thought-provoking question. In a world that is increasingly dominated by proprietary software and closed systems, Linux stands as a shining beacon of openness, flexibility, and community-driven innovation. Is it time for you to embrace the power of the penguin?